bring in Fox News contributor Karl Rove, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff for President George W. Bush. Karl, good afternoon to you. It looks like Joe Biden and his campaign are going to be doing some virtual campaigning in the battleground state of Ohio over the next week. Real Clear Politics average has got him up about 2.3 points, which is about where it was this time in 2016. And then the president went on to win it by 8 points. What do you expect to happen there this year?
Well, I think this is a part of the deliberate strategy of the Biden campaign to look like the board is going, is broadening, and that they've got opportunities in states that lean red. They announced they were buying TV ads. Turned out they were buying TV ads in Ohio, not in the markets in the state that make up the vast majority of the population, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, but they were buying it in the 5th and the 7th largest markets in the state, roughly 500,000 so-called television households. By comparison, they're 3.6, 3.7 million in the 3 largest markets. They're doing the same thing in Texas. In Texas, they went out and said that they were going to buy TV ads in Texas. They spent $70,000 on TV ads. We got 16,211,000 voters in this state. That's 4,000th of 1 cent per voter that they're spending on Texas TV. Today, they announced that they're going to deploy 6 staffers in Texas. I know state representative campaigns in Texas that have more than 6 staffers. But it's a smart move on their part, because with the polls looking good for them, why not try and get inside the mind of your opponent and put them off balance by saying we're going hard for areas that are likely to be Republican, and try and force them into making a mistake. But I think it's a ploy. I don't think it's real.
Right. Something definitely on the mind of President Trump is this idea of expanded mail-in voting, particularly since Nevada's governor signed a bill that was passed in an emergency session to send out mass mail ballots to everybody who's on the voter rolls. So here's what the president told Jonathan Swan from Axios about this idea of mail-in voting.
Because of the China virus, we're supposed to stay home, send millions of ballots all over the country, millions and millions. You know, you could have a case where this election won't be decided on the evening of November 3rd.
Absolutely.
This election could be decided 2 months later.
Karl, the Democratic narrative is that the president's attacks against mail-in voting are unfounded. Are they?
Well, you got to distinguish. Mail-in voting has been a part of the American election process for years, for decades, for over a century. But what the president is objecting to is, like, for example, what we just saw in Nevada. Nevada approved sending a ballot, not an application, but a ballot to everybody on the voter list. This includes over 200,000 people in Clark County, Nevada, Las Vegas, the biggest county in the state, that the Democrat election chief says are inactive voters, and that the post office has already told them don't live at that address anymore. They did this during the primary. They mailed out over his objection. The county commission ordered him to mail. They spent several $100,000, and those ballots came back in. Well, what happens if you do? Now they put it into state law that this will happen, that everybody on the voter registration list, whether they voted in recent elections like the last 6 or 8 years or not, gets a ballot. Where that happens, we're going to see the potential for fraud. And the other issue is that, look, it requires systems, it requires equipment, it requires training, it requires people, it requires procedures in order to handle a mammoth number of mail-in ballots. The state of Washington took 5 years in order to move from a traditional election day election to a mail-in system. And now we're trying to get it done in a matter of months. And we saw what happened in New York. We are nearly 2 months after the New York primaries, and we still have 2 congressional races up in the air because they haven't finished counting the ballots. The Democrats face a problem with this because mail-in ballots traditionally have a much larger number of rejections. The signatures don't match, the ballots are messed up, the ballots arrive late. So the more the Democrats are putting their emphasis on mail-in ballots, potentially they could be dealing themselves a problem by causing people who might otherwise show up on Election Day to miscount, to vote by mail.
Although a judge in New York just ordered ballots that either were not postmarked or came in late to be counted. So a lot of this is kind of on the fly. Karl Rove, great to see you this afternoon. Thanks for joining us.